Welcome to Night Stories, where shadows whisper, nightmares crawl, and every tale drags you deeper into the dark. If you dare to listen, leave the lights off and let the night begin. I work at a place that doesn't exist, or at least that's what the government would like everyone to believe. People imagine spacecraft and little green men locked away in the desert, but that's a decoy, a mask we're happy for them to wear. The truth is worse than any UFO fantasy. What we do here is not about aliens. It's about people. It's about what a human body can become when you take away rules, when you remove morality, when you decide that flesh and bone are nothing but material. I was transferred into the lower complex 2 years ago. That's where the real projects live, far beneath the concrete hangars tourists whisper about. Down there the air smells of bleach and something underneath the bleach, something metallic like wet pennies. The walls sweat with condensation because of the constant recycling of air. You can't smell outside. You can't hear outside. You only hear the low hum of machines and the muffled voices of people who've accepted silence as a survival instinct. The experiments are divided into wings. Each wing houses a set of subjects, each subject numbered, never named. That's intentional. A name means you might feel guilt when the body stops breathing. A number is easier to record when it stops screaming. I remember the first time I was brought into Wing C. It wasn't aliens I saw strapped to the reinforced chairs. It was men and women, stripped naked, their eyes held open with metal prongs, their skin covered in electrodes. Some were volunteers at first, prisoners promised freedom, or desperate people told they were helping their country. But they stopped volunteering long ago. Now we take them. Sometimes they come from hospitals, sometimes from shelters. Nobody comes looking for them. That is why they are perfect. In Wing C, we learned how the body could be broken down and rebuilt. The first phase was always sensory, deprivation and overload. Some were kept in total darkness for weeks, fed through tubes, their bodies locked into harnesses. Others had blinding lights drilled into their vision 24 hours a day. White noise blasted through their skulls until their eardrums ruptured. We weren't testing endurance. We were testing what happens when you peel away sanity like skin from bone. One woman, I think she was subject 82, was locked into a chair for 19 days under constant strobe light. Her screams were recorded until her voice shredded, and then she only produced a wet rasp. On the 20th day, she stopped reacting altogether. Her eyes stayed wide. Her pupils shrunk to pinpoints, and she only trembled when touched. When we cut the restraints, she didn't walk. She crawled, twitching, dragging her limbs like a broken insect. Her mind was gone, stripped clean. They said that was progress. Wing D was where they began surgical work. The surgeons here do not heal. They slice, they stitch, they graft. I stood behind the glass once while they peeled the skin from a man's arm and replaced it with sheets of synthetic muscle. They wanted to see if the body would accept it, if the nerves could fuse. The man was awake the entire time because anesthesia interferes with the data. His screams didn't sound human after the first hour. By the second hour, his vocal cords had collapsed into bubbling gasps. They still worked on him for 3 more. Another subject had his ribs cut open and spread apart. A machine inserted to replace his lungs with experimental filtration sacs. He drowned in his own blood in under 10 minutes, but that wasn't considered a failure. They collected the samples, the footage, the charts of his oxygen levels as his chest cavity filled with red foam. The worst, though, were the children. Yes, they use them too. Small bodies are easier to rewire. I saw a boy no older than 8 wheeled past me, his face covered by a cloth bag. His hands were restrained so tightly the skin had split open. Later I saw him again through reinforced glass, lying on a table while surgeons placed metal rods into his spine, extending him, reshaping him, stretching him like clay. His mouth opened and closed like a fish while wires sparked across his nerves. The sound he made when they forced his back straight still echoes when I close my eyes at night. We keep records of everything. Video, audio, endless pages of handwritten notes. The superiors call it progress, but it's more like a catalog of human misery. Every shriek, every convulsion, every body that crumples into stillness, recorded. Sometimes when I file the tapes, I catch myself watching too long. I shouldn't, but I do. I see the details that cameras don't lie about. Fingernails tearing away from hands, eyes rupturing from pressure, lips splitting when mouths are pried open too wide. There's one part of the facility most of us whisper about but never volunteer to visit. Wing E. It's where the completed subjects are kept. Those are the ones who survived the first rounds. The ones who didn't die on the table or lose themselves entirely. I was sent there once to deliver a report. The hallway was colder than anywhere else, and the doors were heavier, reinforced with bolts the size of my fists. When the guard opened one, I saw something that used to be a man crouched in the corner of a padded cell. His arms were too long, his hands trembling at the ends like spiders twitching. His jaw was stretched unnaturally wide, a metal frame bolted into his cheekbones to keep it open. I thought he was dead until he raised his head. His eyes had no color anymore, just milky film, but they moved toward me. His lips quivered around the metal frame and a sound came out. It wasn't language. It was wet, bubbling, almost like laughter. I left as quickly as I could, but the sound followed me down the hallway. Even with the door sealed, I swore I could still hear it. Every day here feels like another step deeper into something that can't be reversed. The scientists don't speak about morality. They talk about thresholds, about tolerance levels, about breakthroughs. They laugh sometimes while a subject writhes strapped to a gurney, while another gags on a tube rammed down their throat. They treat the screams like background noise, like the hum of the ventilation system. I don't laugh. I don't even speak much anymore. I watch, I write reports, I record the dying. I am part of it, and that is the most horrifying truth of all. I kindly ask you to like and subscribe if you find my stories interesting. Let's continue now. They told me Wing E was a storage unit for the finished trials, a place to keep the bodies that still breathed after everything we had done. That was a lie. Wing E is not storage. Wing E is the end of the line, where the subjects become something else entirely, where what was once human is kept alive in shapes and forms that should never exist. I was reassigned there last month, not as a visitor this time, but as staff. They said my reports were precise, that I had a strong stomach. What they meant was, I didn't faint when I saw bone jutting through muscle, didn't vomit when teeth were pulled out one by one without anesthesia, didn't flinch when a body thrashed itself bloody under restraints. They thought that meant I was suited for Wing E. I wish I had fainted. I wish I had vomited. Maybe then they would have left me in Wing C. The first thing I learned in Wing E is that subjects don't die when they should. Some of them should have been corpses months ago. Yet their hearts keep beating. Their lungs, if they still have lungs, keep sucking air. They have been altered in ways that make them impossible to categorize. Subject 97 was the first I catalogued. He had once been a soldier. Now his skin hung from his body like wet rags. They had grafted strips of muscle from other subjects across his chest, sewn in with crude black sutures that oozed pus. He could not stand, yet he moved, dragging himself across the padded floor with his arms, which had been elongated by rods drilled directly into the bone. His fingers scraped the ground with nails that had grown into yellow talons. His head lolled unnaturally. A metal brace sunk into his skull to keep his neck from snapping under the weight of it. When I entered his chamber, he lifted his face. His eyes were gone, replaced by tiny cameras threaded into the sockets. Wires crawled from them into his skull like veins of copper. The cameras clicked as they focused on me. That sound alone was enough to hollow my stomach. But it was Subject 104 that haunts me most. She was a child once, the same boy I had seen wheeled down the corridor, though I hadn't recognized him until I checked the files. His spine had been reconstructed with metal rods, his limbs lengthened grotesquely, his joints bent at angles that defied anatomy. His mouth had been sewn shut, yet sounds still emerged, muffled, wet, vibrating noises that made my ears ache. He moved constantly, twitching, jerking like a marionette yanked by unseen strings. His room was lined with deep scratches gouged into the walls, scratches made by fingers wrapped in blood-soaked gauze. He wasn't kept sedated. They wanted to study his adaptation under constant distress. That was the phrase written in his file. Adaptation. I couldn't look at him for more than a few seconds. His eyes, still intact, begged in silence, wide and glistening, begging for something I could never give. In Wing E, the rooms are soundproofed, but the doors are not. At night, when the halls are empty, the noises bleed through. Thudding, scraping, whispers, sometimes screaming, muffled as if coming from behind layers of flesh. The guards pretend they don't hear. I try to ignore it, but the sounds drill into my skull and follow me into my sleep. One evening, I was instructed to assist during a feeding procedure. That's how I learned that many of the subjects can't eat like humans anymore. Some have tubes directly into their stomachs. Others are force-fed through slits cut into their throats. Subject 97 had his jaw shattered during an earlier phase. They fitted him with a hinged metal frame that holds his mouth open permanently. To feed him, a technician shoved a thick slurry down his throat using a steel funnel. He gagged and convulsed, vomit spraying back through the funnel, but they forced more inside. The smell was unbearable, acidic and rotten, because his digestive system was failing. Still, they kept pouring until his body sagged in exhaustion. I had to write down every detail of the intake: amount swallowed, amount regurgitated, pulse rate, skin temperature. My handwriting shook the entire page. The most disturbing chamber in Wing A doesn't house a single subject. It's a communal unit, a wide room with reinforced walls and observation slits. Inside, multiple subjects are kept together, stripped of restraints, allowed to interact. I don't know who thought that was a good idea. Maybe they wanted to see if the remnants of human social instinct survived the surgeries. Maybe they just wanted chaos. The first time I looked inside, I saw 4 of them huddled in the corner, twitching and jerking like broken puppets. Their bodies pressed together in a trembling knot. One of them, a woman whose face had been peeled and stitched back in a lopsided grin, rocked back and forth, her jaw opening and closing without sound. Another dragged his leg behind him, bone jutting through the skin, leaving a dark smear on the padded floor. They didn't speak. They didn't even look at each other. They only moved, shifting, trembling, a grotesque rhythm. And then, without warning, one lunged at another, sinking his teeth into the side of her neck. Blood sprayed across the white walls, and the others didn't react with fear or shock. They joined in. They clawed, they bit, they tore. The sound was wet and animalistic, the tearing of meat, the slurping of blood. I stumbled back from the observation slit, bile burning my throat, but the guards didn't move. They let it happen. Later, I saw the official report. They called it pack behavior development. They noted the duration of the attack, the amount of tissue consumed, the response times of each subject. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the report into shreds. But instead, I signed my name at the bottom, confirming the observations. Every day in Wing E is worse than the last, because every day I see less of the human shape inside those things. Skin sagging, jaws wired open, eyes sewn shut, bones shattered and regrown into jagged scaffolds. They're not even monsters. Monsters are born. These are made. I can't tell if the subjects are still aware of what's been done to them. Sometimes, though, I catch a flicker, an eye that follows me too closely, a hand that reaches toward me, a sound that almost forms a word. Those are the worst moments. Because if they know, if they understand, then all of this is beyond cruelty. It's torture carved into the essence of what a human being is. And I am part of it. Every time I pick up a clipboard, every time I make a note, every time I stand and watch through the glass, I am part of it. I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending that I'm only observing. The screams never stop in Wing E. They just change pitch, change tone, become new sounds from mouths that shouldn't still be moving. And when I close my eyes, I hear them louder than before, as if the walls are inside me now. There is a place below Wing E. It isn't on any of the maps, not in the files, not even in the whispered conversations between guards. I only learned about it because I made the mistake of reading too deeply into the restricted reports. The pages were half erased, stamped with black bars and coded signatures, but the words that slipped through chilled me. Wing F, sublevel access required. They told me I was being promoted when they gave me clearance. It didn't feel like a promotion. It felt like a sentence. The elevator ride was longer than any I had taken before. The air grew colder with each floor. My ears popped. The hum of machinery above was replaced by silence. A silence so deep I could hear the blood in my own veins. When the doors opened, the first thing that hit me was the smell. Wing E reeked of antiseptic and rot, but this was worse. It was thick, wet, a stench of things left to fester in dark water. The hallways weren't padded anymore. They were steel, lined with pipes that dripped condensation into pools on the floor. The walls shook occasionally, as if something massive was moving behind them. Wing F isn't a holding area. It's a pit. This is where the experiment stopped being human at all. The first chamber I was brought to had no window, only a heavy steel door with a slit. The guard warned me not to put my face too close. I didn't listen. I looked inside. At first I thought the room was empty. The light inside was dim, flickering. Then the shadows shifted. A shape moved, sliding across the floor. It wasn't walking, it was dragging itself. A mass of limbs fused together. Multiple arms, all different lengths, sprouted from a torso that had no clear front or back. Heads jutted from its surface at random, some blind, some eyeless sockets, some screaming without lungs. Flesh fused to flesh, stitched together with thick black cords. The thing slithered to the wall, pressing its faces against the steel. The sound was unbearable. A chorus of moans, shrieks, babbling words that overlapped into madness. That was Subject 131. According to the file, it was formed by grafting multiple subjects into one continuous body, each forced to share circulation, nerves, organs. Most didn't survive the merging process. The ones that did became that. It had been alive for 6 months. In Wing F, the scientists don't record data like in the other wings. They don't write about pain thresholds or endurance. They record growth. They track mutations. They measure how long a body can survive when it's pushed beyond recognition. The notes read more like gardening logs than medical charts. Rapid tissue expansion. Secondary appendages sprouting. Integration stable. I saw Subject 140 strapped upright in a cruciform frame. His chest had been split open and kept that way with hooks. Something inside him pulsed. It wasn't a heart. It was larger, throbbing, pushing against the ribs like it was trying to escape. Tubes ran from it into tanks filled with thick, dark fluid. He was awake. His eyes rolled in their sockets, foam leaking from his mouth with each shuddering breath. The scientists said the organ wasn't his. It had been implanted, grown from cells of multiple donors, a new prototype for circulation efficiency. He'd been living with it for 19 days. One of the researchers pulled me aside then, almost proud, and asked if I wanted to see their latest breakthrough. I didn't want to, but I nodded, because in this place you don't refuse. They led me into the deepest chamber I've ever entered. It wasn't a cell. It was an open pit ringed with grated walkways and floodlights. The thing at the bottom was alive. I say thing because it no longer had any shape that could be called human. It was a mound of flesh, writhing, rising and falling as if breathing with 100 lungs. Faces pushed through its surface, stretching the skin before sinking back in. Hands clawed outward, then disappeared. Veins the size of ropes pulsed across its mass, feeding blood to all the fragments buried inside. They called it Subject 150. They had been feeding it discarded parts, tissue, bones, anything left from the other experiments. And it had grown. It consumed everything, absorbing it, making it part of itself. It never stopped moving, never stopped muttering. Yes, mutters came from inside it. Whispers, sobbing, words torn apart by too many mouths speaking at once. I leaned over the railing despite myself, and I swear I saw an eye, human and intact, staring directly at me from the surface. It blinked once before sinking back into the mass. The scientists weren't horrified. They were excited. They said Subject 150 was self-sustaining, that it could survive indefinitely, that it was evolving. I asked the wrong question then. I asked what the point of all this was. The researcher only smiled. He said, "You don't understand. We're not studying them. We're cultivating them." Cultivating, like crops. That word hasn't left me since. Because Wing F isn't an end. It's a beginning. These things aren't failures, they're prototypes. What we see as screaming, writhing horrors, they see as progress, as the next step. I left that chamber shaking, bile rising in my throat, but the smell of rot never let me vomit. On the way back up, we passed another hallway, sealed with steel doors thicker than vaults. I asked what was down there. The guard didn't answer. He only gripped his rifle tighter. Later in the files, I found a reference. Wing F, subsection G, unstable harvest. No descriptions, no data. Just 2 words scrawled in the margin by someone long gone. Do not open. I try not to think about what they keep behind those doors. But the noises, God, the noises reach even into the upper wings. Deep, heavy, shuddering sounds like mountains shifting in their sleep. Sometimes the entire floor vibrates. The guards pretend it's the machinery. The scientists pretend they don't notice, but I know. I know something is alive down there. Something too big for the walls that contain it. And we made it. Don't know how much longer I can keep writing these reports without losing my mind. Each time I hold the clipboard, I feel the tremor in my hand. Each time I look through the slit in the steel, I feel the pull of those eyes staring back. Sometimes when I walk the halls alone, I hear whispers behind me. Not in English, not in any language I know. A chorus of voices, low, wet, echoing. I turn and there's nothing there. But I know what it is. They aren't supposed to leave Wing F, but maybe they already have. Want to request a story? Let me know down below and I will write one. I knew I shouldn't have gone back. I knew I should have kept signing the reports, kept my head down, kept pretending not to hear the things in the walls. But curiosity isn't a choice down here. It grows inside you like a tumor, pressing against your skull until it bursts. And I had to see what was in section G. It wasn't easy. The doors to subsection G were triple sealed, with blast shields that only opened by handprint and code. I didn't have access, but one of the senior scientists did. He was sloppy. He kept his clearance card in his coat pocket. I followed him one night after he left the lab, waited until the cameras shifted and took it. My hands shook as I pressed the card into the scanner. I thought alarms would blare. I thought soldiers would come running. The door opened in silence. The air that poured out was different from the rest of the facility. It was thick, damp, almost alive, crawling down my throat like smoke. The hallway beyond was dark, lit only by strips of failing light that flickered in and out. The floor was wet. My boots splashed in something that wasn't just water. It was warm, it clung to me. The sound was there immediately. Not screams, not whispers, breathing. Slow, cavernous breathing, as if the walls themselves were lungs. Each inhale rattled the metal panels. Each exhale coated me in a fine mist. I followed it down deeper until I reached the chamber. Subsection G isn't a collection of cells like the other wings. It's one massive hollow, a pit carved into the earth. The ceiling disappears into shadow, the walls slick with black growths that pulse faintly with light, like veins filled with fire. In the center of the chamber was the harvest. I don't have words that can capture it. I'll try. It was not a single body. It was thousands, melted together, twisted and bound in ways that made no sense. Rows of torsos fused spine to spine, arms extending outward like roots of a tree. Faces stretched across the surface like masks, some weeping, some screaming, some frozen in silent agony. The mass rose from the pit floor like a living mountain, its surface shifting constantly, flesh sliding over flesh, bones cracking and reforming. And it was growing. From its base, tendrils stretched outward, burrowing into the floor and walls, pulsing as they sucked whatever nutrients the earth gave them. Some tendrils ended in bulbous pods, translucent, with half-formed figures thrashing inside. Infants, adults, all shapes. They pressed their faces against the membrane, mouths opening in silent shrieks, before being absorbed back into the main body. The sound of it was unbearable. Every movement was accompanied by a symphony of voices, thousands overlapping, pleading, sobbing, muttering. Some begged for release, some repeated fragments of prayers, some only screamed. And then beneath it all there was another voice, deep, steady, A voice that didn't belong to a victim. It belonged to whatever this had become. It spoke in a rhythm, guttural syllables that vibrated the marrow in my bones. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the intent. It was speaking to something, calling. I stumbled back, gagging, covering my mouth to stop from retching. My foot struck something solid. I looked down. Bodies. Piles of them discarded along the chamber's edge. Not all were dead. Some twitched, weak hands reaching upward, skin half dissolved where the harvest had started to absorb them but stopped before completion. Their mouths opened and closed like fish, but no sound came out. Their eyes followed me, begging, accusing. That's when I realized the truth. Subsection G wasn't a mistake. It wasn't unstable because it failed. It was unstable because it succeeded too well. The harvest wasn't an experiment. It was a factory. The scientists were feeding it. Every failed subject, every corpse, every scrap of flesh from the upper wings, none of it was wasted. It was all dragged down here, thrown into the pit, consumed, added to the whole. They weren't testing the limits of the human body anymore. They were building something, growing something, and it was learning. As I stood there, frozen, one of the pods along the wall ruptured. A shape fell out, slick, writhing, struggling to stand. It had a human form, but wrong. Its arms bent backward, its mouth stretched wider than it should. It stumbled, fell, then crawled on all fours toward the harvest. It didn't scream, it didn't resist. It offered itself willingly, pressing its body against the mass until tendrils wrapped around it and pulled it inside. The harvest shuddered. The voices rose in a wave of sound. 1,000 screams becoming laughter. 1,000 prayers twisting into one chorus. And for the first time I felt it notice me. Every face in the surface turned. Every eye opened. Thousands of them blinking, weeping, grinning all at once. The deep voice stopped its chant. Silence fell. Then slowly, one mouth stretched wide across the shifting mass, lips splitting until they tore into a red cavern. And it spoke, not in words, not in sounds. It spoke inside me. A thought pressed into my skull, raw and violent. You are part of this. I ran. I don't remember climbing the hallway, don't remember the elevator, don't remember swiping the card. I only remember the feeling of those eyes, those mouths, dragging across me like hooks. When I reached the upper levels, nobody asked where I'd been. Nobody noticed the stench clinging to me, the wet footprints I left in the corridor. They don't ask questions here. They don't want the answers. But I can't unsee it, I can't unhear it. The harvest is growing. It's calling to something. And we're still feeding it. I've seen the schedules. More subjects are being prepared. More volunteers are vanishing from prisons, from hospitals, from the streets. They're all going to end up there, in the pit, part of that shifting nightmare. And one day, when it's large enough, when it's strong enough, when whatever it's calling finally answers, the doors won't hold. I don't sleep anymore, I just listen. And every night I hear the breathing, not just from below, not just in the facility, in my room, in my head. And I know what it means. The harvest isn't waiting for us to bring it more. It's already reaching out. Thank you for listening. Hope you didn't get too scared. If you want to listen more stories, check out my channel. Please leave a like and subscribe. It means the whole world to me.